Hi everyone, this is John Daly. I'm here again with Bernie Goldberg for another episode of the No BS Zone. How's it going today, Bernie?
All well so far, John. How about you?
Doing good, thank you. So today we're going to talk about the 2024 presidential election. A few notable things have happened since the last time we talked, including the Trump Town Hall event on CNN last week. Bernie, I assume you watched it. What were your big takeaways?
If you thought, if you're an optimist and you thought that maybe, just maybe, Donald Trump would even a little bit, tone it down, be a little introspective. Um, those naive ideas went right down the drain if you watched the CNN town hall because it was the same old Donald Trump. It was the election was still rigged. January 6th was no big deal. Not only that, it was a beautiful day. Patriots were out there. I'm writing a column about this, which will be up in a few days. He is who he is. I hate to pardon the cliche, but he is who he is. He hasn't changed. He's not going to change. If enough Republicans like him, he will win the nomination. If enough Americans, well, they won't actually like him, but they may dislike Joe Biden more, distinct possibility, then he'll win the general election. But the Donald Trump you saw in 2016 is the same one that you saw at the town hall the other day on CNN. That's who he is. End of discussion on that, from me anyway.
Do you think, and I largely agree with that, same guy, same everything. I don't, do you think there was any real value or benefit be- of doing this town hall the way it was set up beyond ratings for CNN, which is really the only reason the network did it? But do you see like a journalistic value or a value to voters?
Well, when you say beyond ratings for CNN, that's equivalent to saying, besides that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the show? I mean, it was ratings. That's why they did it. Was there a journalistic value? Yeah, I would argue that a leading Republican candidate ought to be heard. The audience, the CNN audience, ought to hear what he has to say about things. Yeah, I think there was a journalistic component to it, but it was all about ratings. Make no mistake about that. If it was Donald Schmagegi, he wouldn't have gotten on CNN no matter what his ratings were.
Right. One thing that stood out for me, and I'm sure it did for anybody watching this, I think CNN came across looking kind of foolish for framing the live audience in attendance as, undecided Republican voters when they were pretty clearly Trump super fans, I think. And some, afterwards you heard some stories coming out of people that were shown in the audience that were actually like Trump campaign workers, people associated with the super PACs. This wasn't just some, really well vetted sampling of individuals. You had the people in the audience laughing when he was making jokes about the sexual assault trial, and they cheered as he kind of ripped into Mike Pence for not throwing away the Constitution to overturn the election for him in 2020. This was not a conflicted audience. Did you did you come across? Did you get that same sense?
Well, here was my sense. What did CNN have to give up in order to get Donald Trump on prime time for an hour? Uh, did they have to call him Mr. President, which they did? They could have called him Mr. Trump. Uh, did they have to agree to who was in the audience? I think that's a distinct possibility, by the way. The more cynical take on it is that CNN loathes Donald Trump. So they wanted people cheering for every goofy thing he said to make Trump supporters look even dumber than CNN thought they were. But I don't know. I wouldn't put it past Donald Trump, and I wouldn't blame him for making conditions. Every candidate would do this, making certain conditions. If you want me on, you have to do the following. And one of the things may have been, I want my people in the audience. If I were CNN, I wouldn't have agreed to that, but that's a possibility.
Interesting, interesting. So looking at the broader GOP picture right now, something I've been complaining about in my columns is that aside from Asa Hutchinson, who no one really knows, and Chris Christie, who, as of the time we're recording this anyway, has yet to enter the race. I don't know if he will. The GOP hopefuls have been too scared to criticize Trump in any meaningful way, and that is, in my view, a recipe for handing Trump an easy win. Matthew Continetti of the Washington Free Beacon wrote the other day that this has been a what he calls a truly invisible primary, very different than primaries in the past where people are going after the front runner. And I think that's a good way of describing it. I wrote last week that if Chris Christie does enter the race and hammers Trump on stage the way he's promising to, he could at least cause some damage to Trump, even if it's to someone else's benefit. Bernie, can you envision any other way for a Republican opponent to gain a foothold in this primary?
I've been wrestling with that because I know your position has been, tell me if I'm wrong, that a challenger to Donald Trump has to take him head on. No fooling around. I wasn't sure about that, but I'm starting to think, well, I'm starting to have a different position than that. Ron DeSantis spoke in Iowa this past weekend. He was very impressive, very smart, very knowledgeable, and I'm going to go back to that word, very impressive. He didn't take Trump on by name, but he clearly took Trump on. If a candidate challenges Donald Trump in a debate, for instance, I don't think Donald Trump would debate because unless he has to, because somebody like Ron DeSantis, who's really smart, is going to clobber him. Donald Trump is going to call him all Ron DeSanctimonious and say he needs a personality transplant and all that. And if Ron DeSantis or anybody else challenges Donald Trump without acting like Donald Trump, I think that's a plus. So if you go after Donald Trump by saying, look, you tell the audience, we need a candidate who can win. Well, that's a reference to Donald Trump. We need a candidate who thinks about the bigger picture and not just himself. That's about Donald Trump. That's a shot at Donald. You can go down a whole list of things like that without saying, Donald Trump, you're a loser, which he is. He's lost. We've discussed this before, but he loses everything after 2016. I just think it's a better strategy. And I'm keeping an open mind, but as of today, I'm thinking it's a better strategy to go after Donald Trump without you saying two words, Donald Trump. You know what I mean? Just go after him on all his weaknesses without saying you're talking about Donald Trump, because anybody with half a brain knows you're talking about Donald Trump. That's
You
where
bring
I
up an
stand.
I was going to say you bring up an interesting point about the well, one about Iowa, two about the debates. People don't realize, he has sort of hinted that he might not come to the debates, and some people think that's smart political strategy. That might be. I'm not sure I'm not sure that's smart actually. Especially when you consider Iowa being the first state that we'll go into. So a lot of people may not remember this, but in 2016, Trump actually lost Iowa to Ted Cruz, and a
Right.
lot of people believe that was in large part because he had boycotted that particular debate. Fox was going to do one, Megyn Kelly was going to be on it. That was the second one that she was going to be hosting, and Trump had that big thing that he started with her, and he decided, just to get out of doing that, or I don't know if he was afraid of Megan or he was trying to make a point, but he got out of it. It went on without him, and Cruz ended up winning. So yeah, it's one thing I think if he's not going to be at the debates, it's going to be hard for Christie or anybody else to even try to hammer him in that sense. But I don't. Do you think he's gonna show up at the debates? He seems
Well,
like he might have learned something from last time, but I don't know.
as a general rule, if you're way, way ahead, like I don't think Biden's going to debate anybody. He's not going to debate RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson, whatever her name is. So if you're way out ahead, you have nothing to gain, but you have a lot to lose. I think Donald Trump would have a lot to lose if he debates, and as I said, Ron DeSantis is on the stage, because Ron DeSantis he's going to be the alternative. And you know what the alternative is? Normal. He's going to be, seriously, he's going to be the normal one. And everybody's going to notice that. Donald Trump might still get his hardcore 25%, whatever the percentage is. But for people who are leaning to Trump, who haven't made up their mind for sure, you hear somebody like Ron DeSantis, who again is very bright and very knowledgeable and very articulate. I think he's going to mop Donald Trump up. By comparison, the comparison is going to be, well, this guy is smart and reasonable. Donald Trump is angry and nasty and looking at life through the rear view mirror, while DeSantis is looking forward. Now, isn't a perfect candidate. I'm not endorsing him or anything like that. That's not my job. I just think if you see a head-to-head comparison, one is sane and normal and the other isn't. And that's how it's going to come across to anybody, I think, who hasn't already made up their mind that they're definitely voting for Donald Trump.
That'll be interesting if Trump does decide not to come to the debates. Not only will DeSantis, I think, present well in the debates, I think a lot of other candidates might as well. It'll be interesting to see if that changes the dynamic because we're used to, Trump popping up off about everything, calling people names, making fun of how they look, all that stuff, and that really sort of throws off the dynamic of a debate like that. Once you kind of have the adults in the room, I'll go ahead and say that, it's just the adults on the debate stage talking about these things. It'll be interesting to see if I think DeSantis will benefit, but it'll be interesting to see if anybody else is able to get a foothold there too. Again, this is all dependent on Trump not being on
You see,
stage.
I think there's a key question, and it goes for Biden also, if he doesn't debate. Even if he doesn't debate somebody with only 19% of the vote, like RFK Jr., what if the moderator asks the candidates on stage, what do you think of Donald Trump not being here? And the one question that I think would resonate with voters is, well, what's he afraid of? What if DeSantis or Asa Hutchinson or whoever, Tim Scott, whoever it is, Nikki Haley, what if they say, oh, I don't know why he's not here, but I wonder, what's he afraid of? People at home are going to, at the exact same time, say, that's a good question. What is he afraid of? And that's not a good look for somebody whose whole persona is Mr. Tough Guy. Mr. Tough Guy can't be afraid of anything. If he's afraid of debating a bunch of nobodies, as he might put it, uh, I don't think that's a good look for him, and I think that could hurt him. I think.
Now, you wrote an interesting piece, I believe it came out Monday, where you said that we're talking about Biden and Trump primarily because they are the big front runners right now. But you wrote earlier this week that you're not convinced we'll actually get this Biden versus Trump 2.0 for reasons that really don't have a whole lot to do with the primaries, the other people in the primary. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it has to do with the primaries to this extent. As I've said so far today, I'm not sure Trump is going to make it to the finish line, but I'm not sure Joe Biden's going to make it to the finish line either. I know he's not running against anybody. First of all, I know Trump is light years ahead of everybody else, so he probably will get to the finish line, but I'm not convinced. November 2024 is a very long way off, and there could be more scandals. There almost certainly will be more indictments that could help him or it could hurt him. Okay. In Joe Biden's case, his poll numbers in a recent poll, a Washington Post ABC News poll, hit 36% approval. I've got a higher approval rating than that, and I'm not in the Democratic anything. Okay. That's his all-time low. What if it gets lower in the coming months? Possibility. Second reason, I'll be generous and kind and civil and say he's not the sharpest guy around anymore, if he ever was. That's not going to get any better, and it could get worse. What if it does? So what if his poll numbers drop and his mental acuity is less than it is today. I could see Democrats convincing him, nice way of saying pushing him out, and not to run. Now, if that happens, what happens next? Well, if it happens late in the game, it's going to be too late for any traditional Democrat like Gavin Newsom, governor of California, to jump in because it'll be late to raise money and it'll be late to form a campaign infrastructure, a team that could actually run for president of the help him run for president of the United States. But there are two people who can get money in the like that and have name recognition and would have a campaign infrastructure in place before sundown. One of them, and please stay with me, folks, don't gag or anything, stay with me. One of them is Hillary Clinton. I'm not saying she's going to jump in. As a matter of fact, I don't think she will, but she could jump in a way that other Democrats can't. And there was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal just this week saying, you know what, if Biden drops out, what happens then? Michelle Obama. I don't think that's going to happen. But those are two people who can get money and can get a campaign team put together instantly. So if Biden drops out and he drops out late, Democrats are going to have a problem because I don't see those two jumping in and anybody else is going to have a tough time competing late in the game. But
Yeah,
the
no,
bottom line for me is I am no longer convinced. Early on, for the past 2 years, I've been saying Biden's not going to run, take it to the bank. And then I had to apologize and say, I was wrong. I was wrong. He is running. He's in the race. If he drops out of the race, I'm patting myself on the back for being right the first time around. And I'm saying I'm no longer convinced that he's going to be in. He wants to be in. I think he's like a lot of politicians, he's selfish. This is about him, but I'm no longer convinced that he will be in. And one more thing. He is Donald Trump was the most divisive president in recent memory. Joe Biden is just as divisive. He turns people against each other every day. This speech at Howard University, a black college, talking about how white supremacy is the biggest terrorist threat in America. What kind of crap is that? What does that do for race relations? And back when Romney was running, they're going to put you all back in chains. He look, I knew George Wallace. I think, the last long interview with him before he died. George Wallace, if he got elected, and he never get elected, of course, would have been the most race baiting politician in American history. Joe Biden is vying for that title, I'm telling you. He panders to whoever he talks to, and he panders to black people because they got him elected the last time around. And it's disgraceful.
yeah, I've made this point before in my columns, but Biden had such a low bar to clear when he won the presidency. He sort of campaigned as a uniter, and you're right, he has taken every opportunity to divide. And I think voters were just looking for a little break from that, a little break from the division, a
Exactly.
little. They didn't even get a lot of break from the chaos, because soon after he was elected we had the Afghanistan mess, you got the border thing. It's like people are just so
Exactly.
tired. People are exhausted. And all he had to do is kind of nurture things a little bit, make things a little bit kinder, gentler, to take a phrase from another president. But yeah, he really has gone out of his way to make voters exhausted again. So.
They voted for Joe Biden. I would venture to say not one person, including his wife, voted for him because they thought he was smart or had the visions or had great ideas or anything like that. They voted for him because he wasn't Donald Trump. They were tired of the chaos. They wanted normal. And what did they get? Besides divisiveness, they got inflation, they got a mess on the southern border, They got a crime wave that rivals, anything we've had for decades in this country. Is that normal? Joe Biden was elected to be normal, to bring things, and he hasn't done it. And he's vulnerable this time around. And he's vulnerable even if it's Donald Trump against Joe Biden. Because in that latest poll that I mentioned, Donald Trump beats Joe Biden by about 10 points, I think, 7 or 8 points anyway. It's a big win for Donald Trump if the election were held today. Of course, pardon the cliche, the election isn't being held today, but Joe Biden is vulnerable, even vulnerable if he's running against Donald Trump.
Now, to add a twist to this conversation, one other angle we wanted to talk about. So, Joe Manchin, the Democratic senator from West Virginia, he's been dropping a few hints about a possible independent or third party run for president. Traditionally, people don't really like third party challenges. They don't really take them all that seriously, and for good reason. But with only, 5% of the country wanting a Biden Trump rematch, is it possible that we end up with, if it's possible that we're going to end up with these two, that a significant number of voters may actually be ready for a third party candidate?
Well, a recent poll had 28% of Americans identified as Democrats, 27% identified as Republicans, and I think it was 3%, 43%, thereabouts, identified as independents. Now, let me give you a little short history of why Joe Manchin may run. He's underwater in the polls in West Virginia. The Republican governor of West Virginia can't run for reelection because it's 2 terms or whatever. And he's announced that he's running for Manchin's Senate seat. Joe Manchin has to make a decision, and I boiled it down to 3 choices. He could run for reelection and hope for the best, but he's underwater right now in the polls, and West Virginia is a ruby red state. He's a Democrat. I don't know. He'd have a tough race ahead of him, but he may choose to do that. He could run as a third party candidate. As you said, they don't do well historically, but this year may be different enough because virtually nobody wants Biden to run and virtually nobody wants Trump to run. Third possibility, which I think would be the most interesting. What if he's the one who challenges Joe Biden? What if he's the one who says, you know what? I've got no future in West Virginia. I want to stay in politics. Third party, that's a long shot. Biden is vulnerable. I'll take a shot. I'm curious as to what you think of that possibility.
My guess is that it's probably not going to happen. I think that would be actually a good thing if he were to do that to challenge Biden. I get the sense though that he's not really liked by the Democratic base that much. I mean, I know
No,
the
he's not.
AOC wing is always taking shots at him, but where all the energy's at in the Democratic Party. Although I guess the same could be said about Biden these days. I think there's not a lot of energy in the Democratic Party for him either. So I don't know. I think he would be a much stronger candidate, obviously, for the Democrats. But as someone who's not a Democrat, not a liberal, someone who doesn't really think like that, I think he would have probably a fairly hard time winning the nomination. But if he was to win the nomination, I think he would win the presidency, especially being against Trump. I think he would have maybe a little bit harder time against some other Republicans, but I think he'd be pretty good, pretty well positioned to win the presidency if he was to win the Democratic nomination.
I agree. I agree on both parts of that supposition. I think he'd have a tough time winning the nomination. So let's stay with that for a second. What's the future of Joe Biden? Does he run for reelection for the Senate from West Virginia and possibly, probably lose? Then he's finished. Does he go for a third party? You don't think that, do you?
No.
And if you don't think he's going to run as a challenger to Joe Biden, where does that leave Joe Manchin? Okay, that's not our problem, that's his problem. He's going to have to make a decision pretty soon. But if he somehow he got the nomination, there are enough independents who say, yeah, the progressive wing will sit home on election day, and that would help the Republican candidate. But there are enough independents, as we just outlined, who would say, yeah, I've always liked this guy. He's not a partisan. He seems reasonable, seems rational, normal. Yeah, I could see voting for him, but he'd have to get the nomination to do that. And that's the catch 22. You need the nomination to win the general election. But if you can't win the nomination, you can't even get to the general election. So whether whatever happens to Joe Manchin, I'm interested because I think he's a good guy. I wouldn't vote for him, but I think he's a good guy. I think he's better than other Democrats. Again, I wouldn't vote for any Democrat. Uh, but I'm curious, just as an observer, I'm curious as to what he's going to do, and he's going to have to fill us in pretty soon.
No, I agree, and I think it's safe to say right now with the situation, neither party is putting forth their best, you know, and and that seems to be okay in some cases with the party bases, which is very aggravating.
Which gets to something I've said before, and forgive me for repeating myself. We're a country of 330 million people, and this is the best we can do. Something is terribly, terribly wrong with how we pick presidential candidates because there are really good people out there, but they can't get through the gauntlet, or they rather they choose not to even enter the race. Who needs that? Who needs being called names? Who needs having everything you've ever done, and I mean ever done, open to the public? Who needs that? So there are people who are smart and good and this and that. And you know what? I'm going out on a limb here. Vivek Ramaswamy, he's not going anywhere, okay? But he's smart, he's articulate, he's an entrepreneur. Uh, I don't know, he hasn't been around long enough to know if he's got principles, but there are people like him who are smart and got great ideas and are different from other politicians. They're not jumping in. They're not jumping in. And by the way, what I just said is not an endorsement. I don't endorse anybody, but it's not an endorsement of Vivek Ramaswamy either. I just want to if I need to make that clear, I want to make that clear. I'm just saying he's the kind of guy, he's representative of people out there who might make a good president who won't even run.
No, no, that's absolutely right. It's tough in either party to you can be very appealing to the larger electorate, but advancing in your own party can be very difficult, and especially now.
I do have one person who's not in politics who is somebody I would endorse. He's smart, he's got good ideas, he's rational, he's reasonable, and it's you, John Daly.
Oh, nice, nice. Well, thank you. Yeah,
And
I don't stand a chance of winning even a local race. Just I live in
well,
this bright red
well,
district,
well,
and
my sources tell me, I could be wrong, but my sources tell me you've been nosing around trying to raise money for a national campaign, and you've got a team you're putting together. I could be wrong about this, but that's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm
yeah,
hearing.
I'm leaning toward the Trump route of just pocketing all the money that I'm getting for donations, and pretending it's going towards a political thing. No,
Or
I appreciate you thinking of me,
maybe
Bernie.
you could,
Very
maybe you could be Trump's vice president
Oh,
if
I don't know.
president.
I don't know why anybody. That's what's funny to me because we've joked about this. Where I'm not really joking. I think Nikki Haley is definitely running to be VP. I think if Tim Scott gets in, that seems to be. I don't know why anybody, after what happened to Mike Pence, would ever want to be Trump's vice president. Again, it's a launch pad.
Absolutely.
I get it, but yeah, it's just
That's no, but that's it. That's it. You do it. You hold your nose. You hold your breath. You close your eyes, and if you win, you're in for 4 years. If you lose, you're the biggest name 4 years out. Presuming if Donald Trump loses, he's not going to try again in 4 years after. You know,
that's true.
I hope, God forbid. Um, but that's why they're in the race. I mean, does Vivek Ramaswamy think he's going to become president of the United States? He's too smart to think he's going to win the nomination. You know,
No, and I'll be honest,
he's not going to be the vice president either. But
no, and I agree. I agree with you that he's a smart guy for sure. Entrepreneur. I don't think he's actually trying to win. I mean, it's you listen to he's one of those guys who I think is just he's sort of a cheerleader for Donald Trump, and I think he's just in there to build his profile at this point. I don't know if he sees himself in politics or something else, but I don't think he's even really actually trying to win. But maybe I'll be proven wrong once we get to the debates. I don't know, but we'll
well,
see.
I don't make predictions, as you know, but I'm confident about this. If if Donald Trump wins the nomination, his running partner will either be Nikki Haley or Tim Scott. I'm
All right,
sure of
we'll
that.
see.
It will
Well,
not,
they're
and I'm
they're
sure
trying for it.
it will not be a white man. It won't be.
That's probably true. That's probably true.
And
But
those two will soften the edges around Trump's chaos. And if Biden is as unattractive as I suspect he would be if he's still in the race, a Trump Tim Scott ticket or a Trump Nikki Haley ticket, I could see that ticket winning.
anything's possible. Events could dictate things. Things could change. Jonah Goldberg brings up the point that at any point during this campaign, Biden could take a really bad spill. Physical spill, take him out of contention. You don't know. It's yeah. There's so many different angles this could go in. I my best what I would prefer, obviously, is someone else, someone other than Trump wins. I think I could, or the nomination. Um, I could, as far as everybody that's currently running or talking about running, I could see myself voting for any of them in a primary, and I'm really hoping that one of them ends up becoming the nominee, and and I have a real choice. I'd love to be able to bring myself to vote for a major party candidate again in an election. It's been a while. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm hoping that's the case.
You would think that if a majority of Americans, including a lot of Democrats, I think a majority of Democrats, don't want you to run, just as a matter of pride, you'd say, if you don't want me, then I don't want you. I'm not running. But
Yeah.
Biden's political strategy is simple. I know they don't want me to run, but if I get when I get the nomination, you'll all vote for me anyway. And he's right. Democrats are going to vote for him. They'll vote for him in large numbers. So if he gets the nomination, he's got the Democratic vote. But to win an election, a candidate needs more than 90% of his own party to vote for him. I'm not sure Joe Biden will get that many Democrats because even they see that his physical and mental condition are such that 4 more years might mean, I hope you're all sitting down, 4 more years, an election that might mean 4 more years of Joe Biden likely would mean several years of President Kamala Harris. And I don't think anybody is up for that. I'm not up for that. That's for sure. I don't know who is. I don't know who's up for that. Um,
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, that's probably a good place to end things, Bernie, unless you had anything else you wanted to add.
it's just thanks for coming on, everybody, and tell your friends.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Let us know what you're thinking in the comment section, and you all have a great day. All right.